And as we talked about last week, the same thing is still going on today. I think we have short-term memories. We forget all that God has done and rebel. But as we also said last week, as several Bible scholars have said about Psalms 106 and 105, that Psalms 105 was about all of God's great deeds, and Psalms 106 is about man's failures. But I really don't see it that way. I see Psalms 106 as God's mercies. It is all about, the failures and things of man, but it shows every time with that, in conjunction with that, that God's mercies endures forever, and that's a great thing. But we got to verses 13 through 15. It says, they soon forgot his works. They did not wait for his counsel, but lusted exceedingly in the wilderness and tested God in the desert. And he gave them their request, but sent leanness to their soul. So again, he says they soon forgot your works. They've seen all of this from Egypt, what he did in Egypt, what he did by the Red Sea. They see what he did when it come to water and things. They're seeing all these things that God took care of them, and they're celebrating these events. But after their celebration comes something else. They're still complaining. They're still forgetting about God can take care of them, and they're not satisfied with what God is giving them. Their faith is strong as long as what's happening. They're getting what they want, and they can see it happening. They can see, they were grumbling at the Red Sea, then they seen God part the Red Sea. While that was still fresh in their mind, they did what on the other side? They were celebrating it. Then they immediately forgot about it. And that's what you're seeing here. But they're wanting something. They were tired of what they were doing, and they had these cravings, and they forgot about his works. But it said they lusted exceedingly. The Hebrew phrase for this is actually they lusted in their lust. They were giving in to these cravings. They wanted more than what they were getting. So God, being God, He gives them exactly what they wanted. But there's something that came with it. What come with it? When He gave them quail, a curse came with it. They had restrictions on, not restrictions, actually they were going to get their fill till it made them sick is what they were actually going to do, where it become, it's like, a little bit of something is a good thing, but a whole lot of it becomes something totally different. You ever had a craving for something, and then you gave into that craving, and then you ate so much till it made you what? Made you sick. You didn't want it no more. That's exactly what God is doing here. He gave them, as He says here, He gave them their request. He says, but sent them leanness in their soul. What do you think He means by that? Leanness in their soul. They're getting fat outside. They're gobbling up all that they wanted, but what was happening?
Their spirit wasn't growing.
Yeah, it wasn't about trusting in God. It was about, okay, God, we're going to acknowledge you long as we see you doing something great at this particular time, and you're giving us exactly what they want. They were growing lean on the inside, so they were getting, as it were, fat and happy on the outside, but they were miserable and lean on the inside. And that's exactly what God was intended for them. What do you think the point of that is? What's the point of giving them what they want so much it makes them sick? What's He still trying to do? What's He still wanting to do?
Wanting them to see that they still need Him.
Yeah, He's still training them. He's like, I know what's best for you. You don't know what's best for you. I'm taking care of you. I listen to your cries. I've got you out here. I'm taking care of you. You've already seen the things that I've done, but yet you're still thinking that I'm not going to take care of you, and it's still not enough to you. So I'm just going to give you what you want and let you realize you don't really know what you want. You may think you're craving it. You may think you want it. That's that natural part of you. That's the fleshly part in you. But there's much more to you than that. And He said, that's what I'm trying to show you. And that's what He continues to try to show them. So He sent them a leanness, as He says here, in their soul. Now, again, He says He gave them their request. We can go and read this in Numbers chapter 11 where this takes place. And again, it just makes them sick. And that's exactly what God intended. Let's move on to verse 16. It says, when they envied Moses in the camp and Aaron the saint of the Lord, the earth opened up and swallowed Dathan and covered the faction of Abiram. A fire was kindled in their company, and the flame burned up the wicked. So here, this refers to the rebellion of Korah that was recorded in Numbers 16. And this rebellion, it started out as sounding like they were concerned for Moses and Aaron. I like how it says here, the saint, Aaron, the saint of the Lord. I think that's being pretty generous for Aaron, seeing how he was involved with the calf thing and different things with this. But nevertheless, they're going to rebel against Moses and Aaron, but it comes from jealousy and envy. That's what they're doing. They're jealous of them. They're envious of them. They told them, you take too much on you. You know, things are being handled, things are going, but you still put yourself in the place of our leader, and you're still telling us what to do, and you're still doing all this. And they didn't like that, so they rebelled against them. And since they rebelled against them, what did God do? He destroyed them, didn't it? Them and the 250 princes, that other leaders that was with them, fire consumed them, and the earth opened up and swallowed them up. But notice, if to the very best that we can do, what is one characteristic that the Bible says about Moses? He did all that God commanded. What did it say about his character? He was humble. He was meek. Why would somebody be jealous of somebody like that and envious of Moses? You think about the position that Moses was put in. God spent a lot of time preparing Moses for that, didn't he? He prepared him for the work that was there, and Moses reluctantly took it. He didn't say, I want to be the one that goes and faces Pharaoh. I want to be the one that has to go through this. I want to be the one that sacrifices and takes this leadership role. I want to be this. Matter of fact, you can go to Exodus chapter 4 and you see all the excuses that Moses gave for the reason he couldn't do it. You know, I'm not good at speaking. I'm these. He gives all of these list of things, and God tells them, why are you telling me this? I created you. You don't think I know what you're like? I know exactly what you're like. You're capable of doing this, and I'm going to send Aaron with you to help you. So here they're put in that position, and they're doing this. And then you've got these individuals that are rebelling up against Moses, the very ones who were celebrating when they come across the Red Sea, wouldn't they? They were celebrating. They were happy about what took place, and now they've had time to murmur and complain in their tents. They've had time to gather up a little coup. And who's Moses to tell us what to do? Who's Moses to lead us out here? And you know, we're thirsty, we're starving, we're not getting the things that we want. And even when we do, Moses is still in this high position, and they're looking at it, I want what he's got. You know, like we talked about last week, how, you know, individuals sometimes will look around and they will, you know, I'm doing this in a congregation, but somebody else is doing this, and I'm envious of their work, so I want to do that too. Remember we talked about Sunday night what love is and is not, and love doesn't do that. The kind of love that God tells us to have, but this is exactly what they did. They rise up against Moses and Aaron, and a fire kindled in their company, and flames burned up the wicked. So God takes control of this. But we're seeing this pattern, just as the psalmist said here. He says, we're still doing this with our fathers. So the psalmist is putting his generation into the same pot as was their fathers. And he said, because they didn't understand your wonders. They didn't understand your works. They didn't understand your mercies. And they didn't there. They didn't in the time of the psalmist, and again, we still don't today. We're still having some of the same problems. Do you think there's still a problem with trusting God today? Think there's still a jealousy problem? An envious problem? Cravings of, it goes back to even the Garden of Eden. Of all the trees and all the fruit that they could eat, Satan made them focus on one thing. He said, there's 500 red or green buttons up here and one red button you can't touch. And what they want to do? They want to hit that red button. That's really what it boils down to. Satan gets us to not think of God's wonders, don't think of His works, don't think of His mercy, don't think of His generosity, think of His restrictions. And God had restrictions here. Follow me. I'm leading you here. I'm instructing you. Follow my statutes. Follow my word. Follow what I do. And they didn't like that. And they seen Moses and Aaron as a representative of that. And, okay, even though they didn't like it, they wanted to be that, didn't they? They wanted to be in that position. Do you think there was times that Moses would have said to them, hey, take it. I don't want it anymore. Look at all I'm having to go through. Look at all I'm having to face. Look at all I'm having to deal with. We're going to see, we see that through different things with Moses when it comes to the children of Israel. But here they were jealous and envious of him and Aaron, and then we see what happened. Let's move on to 19. It says, they made a calf in Horeb and worshipped the molten image. Thus they changed their glory into the image of an ox that eats grass. They forgot God, their Savior, who had done great things in Egypt, wondrous works in the land of Ham, awesome things by the Red Sea. Therefore he said that he would destroy them. Had not Moses, his chosen one, stood before him in the breach to turn away his wrath, lest he destroy them. So they made this calf. Now, the writer of Psalms here didn't put these in chronological order. He's talking about some things that happened, but he's not talking about them in chronological order. We know how the rebellion that he talked about in the golden calf here, the golden calf happened way before that. But as he goes through here, notice what they're doing. Why did they make the golden calf to begin with? What was the purpose of it? You may remember? In Exodus 32, what did that calf... Now, Aaron had a role in this, didn't he? I think, again, the psalmist is being generous to Aaron here, but he had a role in this. But God, knowing his heart like he does all hearts, he still had a place for Aaron through the priesthood and Levites and through that. But what was there in their mind, what was the purpose of that calf? They wanted to worship a calf? What was it?
Moses had been gone for a month or more, and they said, we don't know what's happened to him, so you need, I guess they felt like God was not with them either, so they said, we need God.
Yeah. It's proof that man is going to worship something, and man is going to worship some way. And without instruction, it's going to be wrong, isn't it? They may have had good intentions. This is going to represent God. We've got all this. Let's make something tangible that we can see, something tangible that we can touch. And we'll worship that and say that represents God. That was never what God wanted. So you can imagine, Moses coming down and seeing this and being a part of this. God seeing this over and over. So God sees this, and what is God going to do? He's going to destroy him. He tells Moses, I'm going to make a nation through you. I'm done. I'm done with these individuals. I'm going to make something through you. He said, I will destroy them. Did I put some Exodus up there? I don't know where to talk about it, or I forgot if I had it up there. It says, now therefore let me alone. This is God talking to Moses. Let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation. In other words, leave me alone, Moses, get out of the way. You're about to see my power. They're about to see my power. I'm destroying them. Now, what he's telling Moses is, don't do anything, Moses. And Moses could have. Would Moses been justified of standing there, not doing anything? Have at it, Lord. That's what God told him to do. But Moses didn't not do anything. Moses stands in the breach. It says, then Moses pleaded with the Lord his God and said, Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak and say, he brought them out of out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath. Relent from this harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of I give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. So, a few things we can learn here. One is, do you think God saying this to Moses, was this a test for Moses of what he would do? You know, you can imagine the amount of pressure that Moses is under. You can imagine what he just went through of receiving the law. And he comes down and he sees this. I'd say Moses might have been pretty hot about it himself. He could have said, have at it, Lord. And God tells him, leave me alone, I'm going to destroy him. But Moses pleads with him, and it works. So we've got some lessons here. How do we react when individuals aren't doing what they're supposed to do? Do we try to help, or we just want them destroyed? And two, does this tell us that prayer works? Did God truly intend on destroying his people, and Moses changed his mind with this prayer of talking to him?
I don't think he would have destroyed them because he doesn't lie. But his intentions was they were supposed to have the land forever.
I think this is a good lesson for, we may think we know what somebody deserves. We may think we know what's going to happen. What's the purpose of us praying? We may not know what's going to happen. Do we think God's going to do? Can our prayers make a difference?
Yes.
Prayers of a righteous man availeth much, doesn't it? You know, doctors come in and say, you know, you've got maybe a month left. Tell someone you love that. Do you say, well, doctor's right, ain't no use of praying. Do we still pray? Can that make a difference? I think so. I think sometimes we, and I'm talking about we when I say myself, sometimes we don't think that it can. What about Abraham and talking with God about Sodom and Gomorrah? You know, there's different times that there's been people of God that's went to God to say, don't do this. Stand in the breach like Moses does. And that's a military term, that you're standing in that crevice of the wall, you know, to the enemy there. You're as a buffer, as a protector for safety. It's a military term, standing in the breach, and that's what Moses does. So, did Moses make a difference? Yeah, I mean, we could look at it and say, well, God never intended to do it. He's just testing Moses. God tells Moses, here's what I'm going to do. Don't do anything. Moses is pleading with him, and God doesn't destroy them as he intended. So, did the prayer make a difference? I would say yes. I would say this is proof to us we ought to keep praying. We still serve a living God. Now, he may not work the same way that he did then, but he's still living and active, and he still works. He still does what he says he's going to do. Did I put Romans up there, or do I got more Exodus? Look, notice what Paul says. He said, and they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. Paul even talks about this is what individuals are still doing. We're creating things. I mean, why don't we have images in here? Why don't we have pictures of the cross and things of the cross, and doing, you know, have something that we can tangibly hold on to, that we could worship and look at to represent God? Why don't we have that? Why don't we have us a bull over here or something?
Become the object of your worship.
Yeah, it becomes the object of it. And we become the object of our worship. We do the same thing. We become our own idols. That's the whole purpose, you know, is God is telling them, I'm right here. It's me. Here, just follow my instructions. Don't think you have your own way of worship to try to please me. And we're still doing the same things today. People have their own version of what worship should be. Well, this is my talent, or this is my creativity, or this is what my ability is, so this is how I'm going to worship God. What God cares about is how He wants to be worshiped, not how we think He wants to be. And that's always been the problem. That's my problem in a lot of things in the world today. I think I know a better way because it's my way in a lot of things that I do. It comes down to, if I'm going to worship God, He's the creator, He's the potter, I'm the clay. I need to know what He wants, not what I think He does or what makes me feel better doing it. And I think that's still the problem today, and that's the problem that they had, and that's what Paul was dealing with too. He says, here's what it's become. It's become something, and you're worshiping something that God never intended for us to do. Let's move on. I think we may, well, I don't know if we will. Let's notice here, starting verse, are we at 24? Yeah. It says, then they despised the pleasant land. They did not believe His word, but complained in their tents. He did not heed the voice of the Lord, and did not heed the voice of the Lord. Therefore He raised up His hand in an oath against them, to overthrow them in the wilderness, to overthrow their descendants among the nations, and to scatter them in the lands. They despised the pleasant land, and they did not believe His word. We can go to Numbers 13 and Numbers 14. What event is the psalmist talking about here? It's the spies. They didn't believe the report. They didn't believe when they come back, Joshua and Caleb, it's a land with milk and honey. It's exactly what God said it was going to be. Exactly what God said it was going to be. The good part of it and the inhabitants of the land was exactly what God said. We can go all the way back to Abraham when God made him the promise. God told him who was in the land. That's exactly who was in the land when they got there. And then they complained about it. Got in their tents and started complaining and murmuring. And yeah, I mean, think about it. This could have been a great opportunity. The spies come back, give that report. Man, there are some pretty fierce people and fortified people there. It's going to be tough. What should the people have said? Yeah, we can go get them. Why? Do you not remember Egypt? You don't remember the Red Sea? You don't remember all this event? You don't remember what God did in the rebellion? They could have recalled all of these things in their mind. I think that's what made David so great. I think that's why he was a man after God's own heart. When David was faced with these hardships, he would always recall the things that God did for him in the past. Thus, God is able to do for him now. And that's what gave him the strength. That's what gave him the courage, was still remembering what God did to face the challenge he made. Now, did David still make mistakes? Yeah, but he still trusted in God. These individuals, they come back. They were looking for an excuse, wouldn't they? It's too hard. Because when God gives us something, does He just give it to us and say, listen, you sit right there. Let me spoon feed you. Let me give you just everything you could possibly want. You don't have to do a thing. Is that how God blesses us and teaches us and shows us mercy? No. If we do that to our children, what do? What's that? Yeah. Spare the rod, what? What's that? Is that what it says? Is that what it says? What does it say? Hate the child, doesn't it? Hate the child. I guess it might depend on your translation you're reading, but hate the child. So if I give my child exactly what they want all the time, am I showing love to them? No. Why? Because they're going to be miserable. I couldn't imagine if I get everything if I ever got everything I ever wanted, I would be miserable. I'd be just like them eating. You know, I've done that. I've had a craving for ever since I heard Nana's had that. What is it? I've lost the name of it. The hot fudge sundae, the old looking hot fudge cake. The old looking. I've been craving that, so we went over there one night, and I got dinner, and I got so full on dinner, I didn't get a hot fudge cake. So we decided, hey, make one of them at home. Bake a cake, get the hot fudge, get the ice cream. I have foundered on that. I have ate that till the thought of it. I was going by the kitchen. There's still some cake left and still some ice cream. I could probably eat one more. But the thought of it, I'm thinking, I just don't think I can do it. I just don't think it'll be a while before I crave that again. But I think about a lot of things that I've wanted, and if I got them, I may have wanted them at this time, but now I realize I didn't really want that. That wasn't good. I thought I did. So God gives us what we need, not necessarily what we want, but when He does give us, when He does turn us over to that, then we learn a lesson like, I don't want that, So when we see them, when they have to put forth some effort, God is providing. It's just like the walls of Jericho. The Bible says that God told Joshua, into your hands I give you the city. Remember? That's what He tells them. But they still had to do what God said to do for the walls to come down, didn't He? They didn't just fall down. Well, this land that they're looking at, God has given it to them. He has promised it to them. And so far, God has come through on every promise He has ever told them. Why did they think He would be any different now? But they still have to go into the land and conquer it. They don't want to do that. So, yeah, they're bigger than we are. They're this. Why'd you bring us out here to die? We want to go back to Egypt. Let's get in our tents and let's talk about them. Let's talk about these crazy two that says we can take the land. Well, those crazy two are the ones that believed what God said. But they looked at it and they despised that land. They despised what God had said that they could do. So God tells them, God makes a decision now, okay, you don't want to take it, you're not going to get it. I'm going to give you what you want once again. How's this going to turn out for you? You're going to die in the wilderness. That's how it's going to turn out for you. This is what you wanted, this is what you're going to get. You either follow my promise into the promised land or you die. And that's exactly what they're going to get. But again, put it in the context of this psalmist. This psalmist is writing and telling God, our fathers didn't understand. They didn't understand your wonders. They didn't understand your works. They didn't understand your mercies. And we're still committing iniquity with our fathers. In other words, we're still doing the same thing. I think we could still write this same song, couldn't we? We still do, and I'm speaking from here back. There's a lot of things I don't trust God with that I think I know better. God, I don't know what to do here. I'm praying with Him. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. Instead of be still and see the work of God and think about this for a moment. I don't like the silence. I don't like to be still. So I'm going to make that decision and move on, right or wrong. And find out it was wrong because I think I know best. And that shouldn't always be the case. But here again, you see the people doing what they've always done. Let's move on, Jonathan. Look at starting verse 28. They joined themselves also to Baal of Peor, and ate sacrifices made to the dead. Thus they provoked him to anger with their deeds, and the plague broke out among them. Then Phinehas stood up and intervened, and the plague was stopped, and that was accounted to him for righteousness to all generations forevermore. They joined themselves to Baal of Peor. This is in Numbers 25. This plague broke out, and we see all this that they do. Again, they're turning themselves over. They join themselves to Baal. They ate sacrifices made to the dead. We're seeing all of this that they're doing. It's just once again of turning away from God, of not doing what He says to do, and not trusting Him. They're still not at the point of trusting Him and believing Him. If they truly believe God, if we truly believe God today of everything that He said, I think we would be living different, wouldn't we? I think our lives would be different in some way, because there's still always that doubt there. Let's move on, Jonathan. It says, they angered him also at the water of strife, so that it went ill with Moses on account of them, because they rebelled against his spirit, so that he spoke rashly with his lips. This is in Numbers 20. Here's something that they did. They even got Moses to where Moses was fed up now. And Moses didn't give God the credit. It goes back to to speaking to the rock, to striking the rock, than Moses does, different than what God says. But it's not that got him in trouble. What got him in trouble was saying he was giving them water, and it wasn't God. So he wasn't giving glory to God. Why? Because he was caught up in his anger, in his wrath, because he let their complaining, their murmuring, he had finally had enough. Moses' cup of wrath was full. God wasn't at that time. But Moses' was, and Moses paid the price for it. Again, you see, when we start putting all these puzzle pieces together, it wasn't just about God's relationship with the people. It was about God's relationship with the people, their relationship with Him, Moses' relationship with God, Moses' relationship with the people, and all of this that's going on. You know, a lot of things transpired. And thus, Moses here got caught in the middle in this moment, and he lost his cool. This story to me seems harsh. You know, I don't know about you, it just seems harsh to me, you know, of what takes place. But you take into account, again, all that Moses have seen, all that Moses did and was involved with God. Just like the people, he should have trusted God more in this moment, in this instance. So again, you're seeing this pattern that was still being carried out with the psalmist in that generation, and you still see it carried out when it comes to a lot of Paul's writings, and then you could still see the same thing again today. Let's look at verse 34. It says, they did not destroy the peoples concerning whom the Lord had commanded them, but they mingled with the Gentiles, learned their works, they served their idols, which became a snare to them. They even sacrificed their sons and their daughters to demons. They shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan. And the land was polluted with blood. Thus they were defiled by their own works and played the harlot by their own deeds. So as we see here, what did they do? One part of the instruction of taking the land, what did they have to do? What was one of their commands to do? Kill the inhabitants. Drive them out, kill them. Don't. They didn't do that. That sounds harsh, doesn't it? Kill everyone, drive them all out. Well, that just sounds harsh. God, knowing what would happen, this had happened. So because they didn't do that, whether it was laziness, lack of trust, whatever it was, they didn't do it. So they come from a point of seeing all this great work that God has done to start serving their idols, start serving Molech, and sacrificing their children, burning their children in the fire. So how do you go from seeing all this great work that God had done for them, knowing that, to sacrificing your children to idols? How do you get to that point? Well, it just so happens I'm going to tell you. Jeremy, how do you get to it?
A lot of times I wonder how much control people actually have over the people. When you get to the point where you're sacrificing your children, I just wonder if people have lost all control.
Yeah.
And the good people are just sitting back like, well, we're just going to let this play out for a while.
And I think that's what they did. Because they allowed it, doing it and allowing it gets into the same concept, doesn't it? It's just like today. You know, a lot of times as Christians we get called conservative, we get called narrow-minded, we get called a lot of things, don't we? But look what happens when you open that door up. Do you think they started out, as soon as they got in the land, let me take my child and offer it to the fire? Do you think it started out that way? No, it didn't start out that way, but it became that. Why? Because one, they didn't do what God said to do. They didn't drive out the people. They started mingling with the people. You start mingling and marrying, then you start getting in, well, this isn't so bad. Well, I don't believe that, but that's fine if they want to. Then you go from there to something else, to something else, to something else, and before you know it, you're throwing your kids in the fire. It's just like, take homosexuality. It's one thing to say, Well, as long as that doesn't affect me, right? You know, that's usually what we say. You be you, I'll be me. Don't ask, don't tell, don't do anything like that. And that's how the world accepted it for a while. Then it gets to where you not only have to allow it or tolerate it, you've got to be for it or you're awful, right? That or abortion or whatever it is. So what happens is it goes from one thing, you open that door, it goes to the next, and then before you know it, then you become the bad guy. Evil becomes good, good becomes evil, and then this is where it starts. This is the same thing. We can look at that and say, how could it get to that? How could it possibly get to where they're doing that? Do you think people back in the 40s and 50s look at us today and say, how in the world could it get to that? You think they're doing that? Well, of course. Yeah, they are. That's how it gets. You know, and it does sound, well, that sounds harsh, or, you know, God, I know it says that, but that sounds a little harsh for our culture. Well, God knows what He's talking about and knows that's why He told them to drive them out, because that's what it was going to become. But yet they didn't listen. And it started from one simple thing of not trusting and following God and following out His commands. We don't think there's much to that. And it may not affect us. You know, you make a decision like that. You make a decision based on what you think is best. And see how that turns out. Prodigal son. He gave in to his cravings like they did. He gave in to what he thought was best. How did that turn out for him? Pretty bad till he came to himself, didn't it? What about Abraham telling Lot, you look out and you decide where you want to live. Oh, that looks good over there. I want that. And he gets that. How'd that turn out for his family? See, we think about these choices. It may not affect us, but we get into generations and it will affect. So, did we get done? We're getting close. We can summarize. But think about that. I encourage you to go back and just think about the similarities and think about how we get to where we're at. It's like the old saying, you know, you don't jump in the boat and want to go off the falls. You start drifting along and you don't realize you've got there. And that's what takes place. And I think that's what happens with us when it comes to our serving God.